All right. Yeah. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate being able to come on and chat with you all about some of these, topics that I think we all think about, maybe aren't sure how to completely support. So hopefully this gives you some guidance. So we're talking about some common chronic viruses and how to support healing. Little disclaimer here to start. All right, so our learning objectives for today are to learn about the effects of common chronic viruses on the body and the immune system. We're going to review clinical pearls for combating chronic viruses and understand the comprehensive approach botanicals provide against these stealth infections and discover therapeutic strategies to address post-viral syndrome. All right, so a little bit about me. I'm a naturopathic doctor, graduated from Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine in 2014, so almost 10 years of practice now. When I first started, I was trained as a Lyme literate doctor, now own my own practice, treating all sorts of things, but mostly specializing in digestive health, hormones, fertility, preconception, and chronic illness. I've been working with biocide and botanicals since 2018 and have successfully used these products in my practice over the past 10 years. All right, now to the good stuff. So let's talk for a second a little bit about chronic viruses. So a virus, first off, is an infectious microorganism that rapidly replicates inside a living cell, producing thousands of copies. And we've got some that are addressed quite quickly and some that linger. Okay, so viral illness, it's unavoidable. We've all been exposed to viruses and had illnesses, related to viruses. So a typical course of a virus is acute. We have that uncomfortable period followed by a quick return to health. But for a certain segment of population and certain viruses, the immune system can't mount that full effective response, and this results in the chronic infection. So chronic viruses establish lifelong latency, where they remain dormant or can opportunistically reactivate when the host system is under stress. So what does that mean? It means that these chronic viruses just kind of live there dormant in the body, waiting for an opportunity to reactivate. When they're laying dormant, you really don't know they're there. You have no symptoms. But if you're under stress, if you have lack of sleep, if you are exposed to something where your immune system is hit, this is when the viruses can kind of come back out of hiding and affect our immune systems. Now, when we have this reactivation and these chronic viruses, this can further weaken the immune system and leave us susceptible to other infections, right? So this is where we have a compound effect. And it can leave us susceptible to both new exposures of viruses and other infections or the existing dormant state. So really, there's two events that are fundamental to establishing a chronic virus. First, the virus has to evade our sterilizing immune system, right? They have to be able to withstand our immune forces. And second, the immune system has to adjust its continuous presence of viral antigen-driven inflammatory responses in order to limit viral replication to an acceptable level where there's not damage. So it's kind of this interesting balance and play in the body with chronic viruses. We'll learn a little bit more about the viral later in this talk. But the chronic virus has to be able to stay present without creating too much inflammation, because then it damages the host, ourselves, to the point where that chronic virus can't live in a kind of balanced state in the body. So kind of interesting to think about viruses in that way. So here's another schematic. I won't spend too long on all of this, but just really interesting to see how viruses replicate and how our immune system might respond to that to eventually get us to that chronic infection state. So at the top, just generally, this is showing how acute infections will result in expression of antigens that are associated with the production of new viruses. In the middle, we can start to see that there are variants of the virus. And so this kind of confuses the immune system, thinking, hey, there's a new infection that's present, and it starts to develop new antigens. And this is where we often will see kind of a chronic viral infection. And then we even have the ability for the chronic infection to become latent, right, where it's not producing any antigens, it's silent until it has that opportunity to replicate again and create new antigens. So different circumstances where the virus is kind of affecting our immune system to further its own life cycle. Okay. So let's talk about some of the most common chronic viruses. So again, when dormant, the presence of these viruses are often asymptomatic. However, these stealth pathogens may lead to an array of systemic symptoms and immune dysregulation. So regardless of the specific pathogen, chronic viral illnesses increase inflammation, and they present with many similar symptoms that range from low grade to significant. Some of the common symptoms may include things like fatigue, headache, fever, malaise, irritability, sore throat, and lymphadenopathy, inflammation of the lymph nodes. And these, again, are probably very common symptoms that we're all familiar with. Now, symptoms that persist beyond 4 weeks of an initial onset of this virus is termed something else. It's called post-viral syndrome. So hopefully not too many of us have experienced this, but it is possible for these viruses to continue past their acute stage. And this is where we start to see more of this syndrome. All right, so this is following a viral infection, this post-viral syndrome. The patient may either recover completely or experience the symptoms that follow a relapsing and remitting course. So maybe they come and go, or maybe they're consistent. Females are affected up to 10 times more often than men. And the post-viral syndrome is a common disorder that follows chronic viral infections. Besides the typical chronic viral symptoms, individuals may also experience things like muscle aches, pains, shortness of breath, sleep disturbance, cognitive dysfunction, depression, and so forth. And so a lot of these symptoms are kind of, affect multiple different systems. They're very, non-specific. So it may be hard to diagnose a post-viral syndrome. It may be thought that this is a different condition going on. And a lot of times we do see post-viral syndromes in conjunction with other types of infections or illnesses. So it's really important to kind of go down the line of differential diagnoses and kind of get a sense of what may be going on, what may be affecting each other. And then possible mechanisms for post-viral syndrome, like why do some people get it and other people don't? There's a few different thoughts. Direct viral toxicity. So some viruses may be more toxic than others that kind of create this continual symptomology. We may have endothelial damage and microvascular injury, so injury to the lining of the vessels that can lead to more inflammation and a harder time healing. Immune system dysregulation, that's a really common one in hyperinflammatory state. So when we have a lot of inflammation, this can throw off how the immune system regulates itself, and this can allow the viruses to kind of keep thriving. And hypercoagulability with thrombosis. So this refers to the body's ability to clot. Hyper meaning over clotting, right? There's thickening of the blood. There's not as much circulation happening. And again, if we don't have circulation happening as well as it should be, this can decrease our ability to deliver oxygen, nutrients, and our immune cells to different areas of the body, leaving us more susceptible to things like viruses. So here's a list of some of the most common chronic viruses, and they tend to be the members of the herpes virus family. So again, probably heard this term before, herpes virus. Although there's many different types of herpes viruses, and here's just a handful of them. So we've got the herpes simplex virus 1, which is associated with oral herpes or cold sores. Herpes simplex virus 2, which is associated with the genital herpes or genital sores. But also viruses such as Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus, and varicose-zoster virus. So Epstein-Barr is typically what leads to mononucleosis or mono. Varicella-zoster can lead to things like chickenpox and shingles, and then cytomegalovirus can also be associated with just general illness and mono as well. So I have a table here for you that kind of goes over, I'm not going to go over everything, but it talks about the viruses, what it does in its acute state, but if left there, if it's not addressed by the immune system, if it's lingering, if we're starting to see a reactivation, these are some of the chronic presentations that we may see. So for some people who get Epstein-Barr virus, they may, they're going to have it chronically, but they may be asymptomatic, or it can show up as affecting the liver and the spleen, the lymph nodes, headaches, malaise, fever, and sore throats. Those symptoms can last for several months. And probably the most common symptom is this debilitating heavy fatigue. This is really common. I've had this myself. It's no fun. And I've had acute versions of it. And then during times of stress, during finals and medical school, it has reactivated. So just again, shows that connection to stress quite a bit. Human herpes virus 6 is another one, or HHV6. This one with chronic presentation, you may see things like fever, diarrhea, rash. Reactivation can occur in the brain, lungs, heart, kidney, and the gastrointestinal tract. So, definitely areas that we don't want them to be. Has even shown some issues with infertility, and if it's affecting the thyroid, can show up as Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So it's really important when we are addressing people with autoimmune diseases and more chronic conditions that we think about their viral load, right? How much viruses have they been exposed to? Do they have chronic viruses that their body is kind of holding on to? Are they being reactivated? So those are big questions to ask. Of course, we talked about the herpes simplex 1 and 2 already, so oral and genital lesions. Yes, they can be acute, but also when they're chronic, they can both cause not only skin lesions, but also systemic symptoms too. And then the varicella zoster, this can be chickenpox as an initial infection, and then when it's reactivated, typically later in life, we see it as shingles. Right, this can cause post-thoracic neuralgia, so very painful, nerve pain, numbness. It's commonly found on the trunks, the face, with or without lesions, and it can even lead to things like pneumonia and sepsis. So it's something to really think about. Coxsackie virus is actually not a herpes virus, but it was in here because it's a common chronic virus as well, known as hand, foot, mouth disease in children, and often you'll see it as an upper respiratory symptom in adults. All right. So how do chronic viruses affect our immune system? So we've talked a little bit already about, some of this, but chronic viral infections, they arise from immune dysregulation, right? Which ultimately leads to immune suppression and a concurrent increase in inflammation throughout the body. This is key because we're going to see how this affects, not only our immune system, but how our body can then be more susceptible to other types of diseases and illness. So, interestingly, the viral illness can either be a result of or can cause a number of other illnesses in the body. And this does make the diagnosis very challenging because the symptoms can imitate other common health concerns. They're nonspecific. Sometimes they rotate. So it's important to identify whether the following issues can also be present if you're suspecting chronic viruses. So things like nutritional deficiencies, thyroid dysfunction, especially when we talked about autoimmune thyroid like Hashimoto's, adrenal dysfunction, especially if you're under a lot of stress and you're not able to mount a good stress response or immune response. Mitochondrial dysfunction, we're going to talk about this a little bit later too. Mitochondria are kind of the power, the powerhouse of the cells. This is where all of our ATP is produced. And if our cells are really suffering and not able to create that energy, then our whole body and organ systems feel weaker. They're not able to heal as well. It can be associated with gastrointestinal disorders, autoimmunity, which we mentioned, and here's a handful, and then other chronic infections. Patients that have Lyme disease, parasites, mold toxins can also be more susceptible to having chronic viruses reactivate, and vice versa. A lot of times we'll see chronic viruses activate these other infections and make them more prominent, make them worse, make them harder to heal from. All right, so a little bit about the elephant in the room. This was a really interesting article. It was showing how, some viruses cause underlying chronic infections. And these viruses can stay inactive in our bodies without making us sick and can then reactivate if the body is dealing with another infection or if it's under stress. The reactivated virus can produce symptoms, especially in people with weakened immune systems. Okay, so this was a study looking at the effects of chronic viral infections and COVID, the likelihood of someone developing long COVID in particular. And they interviewed 280 people who had long COVID and took blood samples to determine whether they had a chronic infection and whether that infection would have been active at the same time that they were infected with SARS-CoV-2. And they found that different chronic infections were associated actually with the development of different long COVID symptoms. So for example, Epstein-Barr virus reactivation was most strongly associated with long COVID symptoms of fatigue. So if you had Epstein-Barr virus and also got COVID, it was common to see that if you did actually get long COVID, that fatigue would be a common symptom. Underlying HIV infections were associated with neurocognitive long COVID symptoms. And actually, on the reverse side of this, chronic cytomegalovirus was less prevalent, had less prevalence of neurocognitive symptoms and less intense long COVID symptoms in general. So just interesting to see how these viruses interact with each other and can either, make it worse or potentially, have less symptoms. All right, any questions so far? We're going to get into some clinical pearls now.
I think one question is, how do people know which viruses and latent viruses they have? You may get to that.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I didn't add it in this talk, but typically that's a great question. You can do blood testing to look at antibodies to these different viruses. So for example, with Epstein-Barr virus, there are many different antigens to look at. You can look at early onset antibodies, nuclear antibodies to Epstein-Barr to kind of identify, is it a current exposure? Is it a past exposure to the virus, and so forth? You can look at, so there's different antibodies that typically are activated for chronic versus an acute reaction. So typically people that have an acute infection will have elevated IgM antibodies for that particular virus. And if they have elevated IgG antibodies alone, that may be more evident that they had past exposure. So it's the combination of testing for these viruses through blood work and looking at antibodies in combination with people's symptoms.
Okay,
yeah,
so
great question.
A functional doctor, naturopathic doctor will be able to suggest or order lab to investigate these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, these viruses are so common and so, oftentimes so chronic that even traditional doctors will often run these panels. They may not always start there, but I have seen a lot of patients come to me and they've already gotten this blood work done.
And do they show viral load? Or not
so some of the great questions, some of the tests will just say positive or negative. That's not really going to show the load as much as the quantitative test that will give you a number. It's over 21, it's it's 560 versus just positive or negative. So I like to look at tests that will give me a number, because you can kind of have a general sense of the higher the number of antibodies, typically the more severe, the more of viral load someone is dealing with, the more reaction they have from their immune system. So it definitely can have a little bit more weight than just yes or no.
And we've all been exposed. If I tested,
and we've all been exposed.
Have positive for many, not all of these, but I'm not in a weakened state, so I'm tolerating it, living along. Yeah.
Right. And this is where, it's really interesting. We'll talk about this in the next slide is, I think we think about viruses as being innately bad, but just like the microbiome has beneficial flora and pathogenic and opportunistic flora, the same thing goes with viruses. In fact, there's kind of this immune priming that happens with viral exposure, that it helps our immune system do a better job of identifying things that shouldn't be there. So really interesting to kind of see how it all works together, that our bodies are just innately intelligent to come into contact with things that may not always be beneficial, but work through that and help create a stronger system from that.
That's right. I totally get that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I love that.
That's great.
Yeah, great questions. Questions. Keep them coming.
Okay.
So yeah, the gut is, anytime you hear me talk, you'll probably always hear me talk about the gut, because it's just the center to everything, right? Most of our immune system, we talked about this in our last talk, 70 to 80% of our immune system is located in our gut. Our gut has more neuron communication from the gut to the brain versus from the brain to the gut. We have hormone metabolism happening there. We've got short chain fatty acid production. just so much is happening in the gut. And so we really want to pay attention. Even if you don't have gut specific symptoms like gas, bloating, and so forth, if you're treating someone or you're dealing with health issues, think about what's going on in the gut, right? And there's always ways to optimize it. So Again, the microbiome plays such a vital role in immune function, in defending against viral infections in many different ways. So a healthy microbiome is responsible for inducing tolerance and competence in the immune system, kind of the gas and brakes, what should we go after? What shouldn't we go after? This allows us to make appropriate responses with our immune system and not create too much inflammation, right? Which can be damaging. Gut dysbiosis is actually shown to alter immune function of the gut, both locally and systemically. So when we have an imbalance in that microbiome, this is when we start to see things kind of become disarrayed, both locally in the gut and throughout our bodies. So the microbiota can inhibit some viral infections with influence on the intestinal epithelium, viral attachment, and host environment. So these microbes can actually help prevent viruses from attaching to the gut lining, and also can influence the host environment so that it's not as good of an environment for the viruses to be there. And those with chronic viral infections are often immunocompromised, meaning their immune system isn't working as well as it should. And the viral infections can make them more prone to microbial dysbiosis in the gut and all of its downstream effects. So it's interesting. I mean, we can have it both ways, right? We can have microbes that help support and kind of get rid of the viruses, but also when the viral infections are there, it can lead to dysbiosis. That can affect us in many ways, right? Leaky gut, gut symptoms themselves, issues with kind of the gut-brain connection, and so forth. So working on clearing overgrowth if it's there, supporting beneficial flora balance, and supporting that intestinal permeability to make sure things don't go in and out of the gut that aren't supposed to be, will really help strengthen the immune system and reduce viral threats. So really important to work on the gut. So the three main things is support dysbiosis, support beneficial flora, and then work on that barrier lining, right? Make sure that it's as strong as possible. Okay, so I mentioned this before, the virome. This is kind of a newer kind of word to me even, but we know we have that, the commensal bacteria are known to regulate host immune response and systemic physiology in fundamentally important ways, but we also have viruses that do the same thing. In fact, some chronic viruses are so common that they're part of our normal flora of most humans, right? So this less recognized contributors to our metagenome are viruses that establish chronic infections and retroviral elements. Now, retroviruses just refers to a family of RNA viruses that have an enzyme that's capable of making a complementary DNA copy of the viral RNA that can then integrate into a host cell, which is so interesting to me. So it actually takes its own RNA, genome, makes it into DNA, and then inserts it into our host cell, into the host cell. So incredible they can do that. So some of these chronic infections are so common that they're actually part of the normal flora of most humans. Chronic viral infection is a process of dynamic metastable equilibrium between the virome and the host immune system that could be dangerous, benign, or even symbiotic. So again, this kind of delicate dance and balance between the chronic virus figuring out how much to kind of rear its ugly head and how much to kind of sit back and not overstimulate the immune system. Because it doesn't want to, ultimately the viruses want us to thrive because they live off of us. So they don't necessarily want to cause so much damage that they, wipe out the host. So they have to kind of, use this kind of delicate balance as well. And of course, our immune systems are doing the same thing. They want to go after the virus without creating so much inflammation that it damages our own tissues. So that's kind of what the next line says here. So ongoing immune response hold the chronic viruses at bay while avoiding immunopathologic damage to persistently infected tissues. So this downregulation of inflammation during chronic viral infections can result in a decreased tissue damage. So, the immune system has to learn, how much do I respond and how much do I kind of sit back and just kind of let things be? So this immunologic imprint generated by these responses to our virome defines the normal immune system. This helps our immune system learn how to better respond to things. Pretty interesting to think about it like that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the second big clinical pearl is stress. And I mentioned this before. I personally have dealt with Epstein-Barr virus reactivating during times of high stress. Mm-hmm. And it's probably one of the most the most common contributing factors to a weakened immune system and reactivation of chronic viruses. Now, the relationship between stress and illness is complex, but the susceptibility to stress varies from person to person. Factors that influence the susceptibility to stress can be genetic variations, coping styles, personality types, social support. All those things will play a role. And we know short-term stress can actually boost the immune system, right? So stress, all the stress isn't bad. We need stress to help our bodies respond in an appropriate way. But chronic stress, so stress either a low amounts over a long period of time or even high amounts over a long period of time, can significantly affect our immune system and ultimately manifest as illness. So the biggest question here is management, right, of stress. So just to kind of remind you what it does to the body, stress raises catecholamines like epinephrine and norepinephrine. It suppresses T cells levels, which can suppress immune function. And this suppression in turn can actually raise the risk for viral infections. So besides this, chronic stress can increase histamines, which we know can release all sorts of inflammation and allergy type symptoms. It can affect blood sugar and insulin levels. It can alter acid concentration in the stomach. And this is really important because we'll see a lot of people that have issues with acid reflux or low digestive enzyme function. Well, a lot of times that's triggered by stress. So just dealing with stress can help people produce stomach acid and other enzymes more efficiently so they can break down their food and absorb nutrients better. Stress can lead to plaque buildup in the arteries. So we know that's not good. It can increase the risk of psychiatric disorders, which I'm sure is not surprising to hear. And it can even affect tumor development and reduce natural killer cells. So I love this slide because it's like, stress is bad for the body, at least chronic stress. It can make your immune system weak, but to see how it individually can affect all these different systems is really profound, I think. And just kind of reminds us that, yes, supplements and diet and all that is really important. But if we're not taking care of our mental health, our emotional, spiritual health, it's really hard to get healthy, stay healthy. And so this is a big piece, of our overall wellness. And I know you guys talk quite a bit about this at Bauman. So I love that.
Yeah.
So the next few slides are kind of, again, I know we know about stress and sources of stress, but I think it just breaks it down in a really interesting way. I'd love to have a conversation about this. So anyone that has any feedback, but I love the breakdown of these sources of stress, especially in our modern world, right? We've got life events, which are typically things we can't always control, right? I mean, death of a family member, divorce, personal injuries, and good stress too, right? Marriage, great, but leading up to the wedding, that can be a little bit stressful. And getting a new job, being fired at a job. These are big life events that, of course, are going to cause stress. So there's not necessarily, you can't avoid these things, but just understanding where the different stressors come from and then how to manage them is helpful. Daily hassles are things like, okay, I've got way too many things to do on my to-do list. I don't have enough time to do them. The rising cost of common goods, house maintenance, physical appearance, all the kind of day-to-day things. Okay. And then we have our constant connection, always being on with technology. It's of course got its pros and cons. But we've got those constant alerts from our email, even when it's on the weekend or it's late at night. We've got alerts from our social media pages. And so we're constantly inundated with, this information, which sometimes can be overwhelming. So,
Comment.
Yeah.
Okay. I like these. I think they're very clear and we're all in that situation to one degree or another. The other couple of things which are very, big is chemical stress.
Oh, absolutely.
So, gosh, chemicals in the water, chemicals in the food, chemicals in the air, chemicals, toxins, all that stuff. So those are really stressful, and
That's a great point.
They trigger all kinds of inflammatory responses, and blah blah blah, and they intersect with other things like viruses. That's number one. And the other one is poverty and financial difficulty, because most people are really under pressure and not holding up in this material world.
Yeah.
So
totally agree.
That's pretty overwhelming, and then coping becomes People cope in funny ways. But
Definitely.
it seems like when I was born, back in the day, it was pretty mellow, and everybody had a positive expectation about how it was going to work out.
Yeah.
It was, nuclear bombs, and we would get under our desk because, the Russians were going to blow us away. So it wasn't without that. There was,
Yeah.
but it was still middle class mentality. And now it's like, we don't know what's going to happen. So uncertainty,
Yeah.
global
It's scary.
uncertainty is really scary. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
those are
Absolutely. And
other, components here. Yeah.
yeah, I love that. And even another one to add on to that is the activation. I mean, yes, the connection of getting the information, but also just the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth and all
Oh
the
yeah. Yeah.
electronic
Yeah.
stress. I mean, there's studies showing that those things can activate Lyme disease and viruses. And so it's kind of crazy, that we're just, even when we tried our best to shut off, I put my phone on airplane mode and all that. I mean, all the towers that are constantly around. So that kind of stress too, that
Energetic.
EMF stress is huge too, especially with viruses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we deal with this, right? It's like, how do we, I mean, Dr. Bowman is so right. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's constant rising of prices of everything. And yet, it's not like we're getting paid a whole lot more. It's becomes very stressful. Um, and so some of the things I like, this article that I found that I thought was really, really thoughtful is, I mean, the life events are going to be a little bit tricky. You can't change them, right? So it's really more about perspective and mindset. We're going to talk a little bit about that on the next slide. But for the daily hassles, it's considering what's in your toolkit for coping, right? So perhaps you have a system or a process that can help with misplacing or losing things, or coming up with a realistic to-do list that doesn't, have you doing everything in one day. Setting boundaries, so there's a lot of different ways that we can, the idea that you want to focus on what you can control, instead of all the things that you can't control and you start to spiral. But also, speaking to a psychologist is helpful to kind of manage that daily stress. Talking to close friends or family, that support system that you have is really important. But really, the most important thing is to do something versus do nothing. Sit there and just stress about it, and because then you feel constantly more pulled into this vortex of, I'm stuck, I'm stressed, I can't do anything. You just kind of want to focus on those small little things that you can chip away at, and slowly kind of bring some control back into your life. So I really like that tips for the daily hassles, at least. And for the constant connection, I mean, there's lots of ways that we can try to manage that. As mentioned, trying to put your technology on, shutting it off, or unplugging the Wi-Fi at night, or airplane mode. You can shut alerts off. You can give yourself kind of, again, boundaries on how long you're going to be on social media per day. Maybe you take a social media break. Maybe you don't scroll through the news at night. So just different ways to kind of help prevent your brain from kind of getting into that constant worry state is really important. Okay, so yeah, I like this because, again, it's tools for managing modern day stress, which is so different than even just a handful of years ago. So this is really about mindset and how mindset affects stress. Okay, so certain personality styles, including perfectionists, those experiencing imposter syndrome, those with people-pleasing tendencies, they may often find that mindset contributes to their experience of stress. What are other people thinking of me? Did I do a good enough job? I don't think I did it good enough. Like, those things are a lot of times just in our own heads, and we create all this stress for no good reason. So mindset can lead you to also take on too much and to stop you from setting appropriate boundaries that would limit the stress that you would experience. So here are some tips to improve on that. First, develop realistic expectations. So I think that's really important. How you do things and what's required of you, of how well it must be done. Often the stress arises when the reality doesn't meet the expectations, right? So for example, things should go as planned, that you should be able to manage a task, that you should be in control. Well, if sometimes you are having a hard time managing that task, asking for help would be a really helpful thing to do versus just kind of getting stuck like, you're not doing a good enough job. Another one is step back from shoulds and other unhelpful thinking styles. I should be doing this. Oh, I want to sit down and just relax, but I should do the laundry. I should do this. I know should is one of those words that often is, you can remove that from your vocabulary or at least try. And what would I like to do right now? Or what is something small that I can do right now that would be helpful, to lower my stress, things like that. And flipping the script on unhelpful thoughts. So this is kind of a little example of, someone thinking about, oh, this is an absolute disaster. I'm making a fool of myself when it comes to public speaking. Everyone's going to laugh at me. And then the woman next to him is saying, oh, I'm not a fan of public speaking, but I can get through it. I can stay focused. I can stay positive. I'll practice. I may not be my best, but it's not going to be a disaster. So even just going into tasks, thinking that, I'm going to do my best and I'm going to, do what I can, is just such a better attitude to have and creates a lot less stress versus already dreading what's going to come before it actually even happens. So I like that one too. All right. So again, while stress is inevitable, there are ways in which life contributes to the problem. So given that we're all time challenged, which is very true, it's easy to see how looking for our health for looking after our health can fall to the wayside. So again, these are personal examples for me too. I mean, I'm too tired to work out. I'm just going to relax. I'm just going to sit. I'm going to rely on that caffeine and sugar for a pick me up. I'm going to have this, sweet treat because I just trying to reward myself. Easy to neglect some of the, the typical healthcare or self-care kind of things that we would like to be doing. So here are some tips to reduce that stress. So forget relying on being in the mood or waiting for the right time. Instead, commit to just doing it. Put it in your calendar. Monday at 9:00, I'm going to the gym, every Monday or whatever it is. Try to find your motivation, whether that's being accountable to others or thinking about how you will feel after looking after yourself. So figure out what works for you. Some people need motivation from others. Some think about, because they like that accountability. Some, like to think about, okay, this is going to make me feel really good, so I'm going to do it. But find what works for you in terms of motivation. Also going slow, practicing mindfulness, getting into a nature of starting to journal or any kind of activities that help you to slow down your mind and your body. And that will help you kind of reduce stress. And then commit to being consistent so that the habit eventually forms. So they say it takes 21 days for a habit to become something that's just in your daily routine. Just kind of little tips there. All right. And then finally, this is my last slide on stress, but I just think it's so important because it's like we know stress is there. We know it's impacting our health, but sometimes you're just in this rut and it's hard to really figure out how to take the steps to actually change, how your body's going to react to stress. So again, we want to just make sure that we're not doing nothing. We want to avoid dealing with the source of stress means that the problem won't be solved, nor will make things easier. In fact, it could even increase stress if you're just postponing the inevitable. So avoiding experiencing your emotions by using things like alcohol or shopping to dull emotions or avoid sadness means you're going to rely on these coping skills again and again. So instead of doing that, instead of trying to rely on these poor coping skills, here are some coping skills that can be more root cause and supportive. So the first section is problem-focused coping skills. So boundary setting, which we talked about before, making sure you're not taking on too much. Learning how to say no, that's a really important one for people. Sometimes it's okay to say no, and be a little selfish if you know that you need time to yourself or something's going to be too overwhelming for you. Seeking support and guidance, making sure that you, reach out for help when you need it. Time management. One of the things I talk to my patients about is block scheduling, looking at your calendar and kind of blocking out when you're going to do each thing throughout the week. That way you don't, go through the day thinking, oh, what should I do now? What should I do now? That's often becomes even, itself stressful and creates a lot of taxing on the brain to kind of think about, oh, I know I need to do something, but what should I do now? if you kind of have it like mapped out, okay, I'm going to check emails at this time, then I'm going to write this paper, then I'm going to make phone calls, then you don't have to think about it. The time comes up and you know exactly what you're doing. So establishing systems and processes that, as well as routines that you can kind of repeat. So you don't have to keep doing, coming up with these routines over and over, these schedules. Okay. And then emotional focused coping. So this is going to help you deal with, you know, all the feels, your feelings. So it's not always possible to do these things right at the source of the stress. But, you know, later on you can kind of reflect back and try to work on these coping skills. So exercise to help reduce stress, especially helping to lower cortisol and adrenaline, meditation and mindfulness, self-soothing skills such as distress tolerance, journaling, reframing or flipping the script. What are some of your favorites, Dr. Bauman?
Gee whiz. I just think taking a time out when you need it.
I
You know, the
agree.
point of like, oh my gosh, I'm not with the program. I'm just not. I'm
Yeah,
not present. I'm on, something is bothering me. I'm distracted and just say, okay, 5 minutes. Five
that's a
minutes,
great point.
I'm out. I'm gonna sit with myself, relax, breathe, check in, and go, so what is up? And ask
Yeah.
my guidance, my soul, like, so
Hmm.
what is going on? And sometimes it's something obvious, and sometimes it's something that happened to me, back there, or it's an unconscious trauma
Hmm.
surface where I can't even listen to your lecture because I'm just responding to some other trigger or cue. Because we get triggered
Yeah.
a lot.
Oh,
Triggering is
yeah.
a big thing. And when people are triggered, they're not here. And then
I
they don't
agree.
know how to deal with it, or even what it is. And
Yep.
sometimes it's like, well, I'm gonna have to just regroup. And if it's a big
Yeah.
thing, I'll take more time. Because the
I,
bigger
I
it
love
is,
that point.
the more self-care and the more reflection. So I think
Definitely.
reflection is helpful because if
Yeah.
you ask anybody, including a kid, you go, what's going on? That's the greatest question. I don't know. Well, take a minute and
Mm-hmm.
look at what's going on. And
Totally.
I could never guess what's going on. Mostly, as parents, we project, but if it's just write about it, draw about it, think about it, sing about it, or just put it out there as a question,
Yeah.
as an inquiry, and it will, it'll make itself known through your, um,
Hmm.
your internal process.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, sometimes you're just not having an on day, right? And you know, it's funny because if we have physical symptoms like that, oh, my throat's just a little off, I have a headache, you take a break. But when we're mentally not feeling well and focused, it's funny how taking a break seems like it's not warranted, but it is, right? Even if you take 5 minutes and just breathe and ground yourself, like it's amazing how you can come back so much more focused. So I
Yeah,
love that tip.
the funny thing is, let's say you're feeling off. Let's say you had a bad moment, and sometimes, like, I did something I didn't like. It's not what you did. I just,
Right.
didn't show up the way I would hope to show up. Okay. Or that if you eat, drink, smoke, shop, distract, it's worse.
Yeah.
It
It's
doesn't
going to
get
just
better.
get
It
deeper and
doesn't,
deeper.
if you don't look into the heart of the matter and
Yeah.
take responsibility for yourself, trying to get away from it, it will just come back and stay longer. And then all
Yeah.
those latent conditions will activate. And you go, oh, I got
Exactly.
a headache, I got a stomach ache, I got a backache,
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
so tired. And usually when
Yep.
you're so tired is when you get downtime because you just say, I'm just too tired, which is
Right.
okay. I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
we're not expected to be on the go as much as most people are expected to be on the,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And that's where I think boundaries are such an important skill to learn in this time and age because we can connect with each other so easily, so fast through text and email. Sometimes it's okay to not answer that email right away, like especially if it's on a weekend or it's at night after working hours. It helps to establish not only boundaries for yourself, but boundaries for whoever you're working with, your clients, your patients, whatever. Um, it's healthy to do that, to turn off sometimes. And we need it to reboost. So I love that. Yeah, thank you. I love going out in nature. So I'll take a walk, I'll go get some sunlight, some fresh air. That really helps to ground me quite a bit. when I'm kind of stuck in a spiral like that or feeling a lot of stress.
That's the way to do
All
it.
right. Yeah.
We turn the slides.
Okay. All right. So clinical pearl number 3. So I know we talked a lot about stress, but I just thought it was so important. I think it's so huge that and I think we know about it, but there's not always great ways to support people how to manage it. And so hopefully that was helpful. Okay. So supporting the mitochondria, we had talked about mitochondria before. This is how we produce cellular energy that we need for optimal functioning. And oxidative stress and excessive inflammation that can occur during acute and chronic illnesses can impair our mitochondria and lead to things like fatigue, body pain, stiffness, the sore muscles, joint pain, and even cognitive dysfunction, so brain fog. So we want to make sure that we support mitochondria. There's many ways to do it. Diet and nutrition is huge. Botanicals can help support, and of course, stress reduction. So another place where reducing stress is really helpful. So again, mitochondria, here's some nutrients and kind of nutraceuticals, I should say, that really can help mitochondria function. So carnitine is an amino acid, and it helps to shuttle fats across the cells, which is a really important piece to the Krebs cycle. If you remember all this from science class, but producing that ATP, we need to be able to shuttle fat and nutrients across those membranes. CoQ10 is a really important nutrient that helps to support energy of muscles. So you'll often see people taking CoQ10 if they're on a statin, like a cholesterol lowering medication, because it can deplete us of CoQ10 and lead to muscle issues. But just in general, CoQ10 is really helpful for mitochondria, energy, and supporting muscles. Alpha lipoic acid is a potent antioxidant. So anything that's an antioxidant is going to help support reducing free radicals that we know can damage mitochondria. Same thing with the NADH. It also allows for energy production. Phospholipids are going to help support the lining of the cells as well as the membrane of the mitochondria. So, making sure we have really, the structure of those cells in the mitochondria are as healthy as possible is really important. And then liposomal or IV glutathione. Glutathione is one of the most potent antioxidants that we have in the body. It's made up of 3 different amino acids. And it can be difficult for some people to manufacture because it does take 3 amino acids that come together and are converted. So, and it's not great absorbed when we take it as a supplement. So you want to make sure it's liposomal, meaning it's emulsified in a fat so we can absorb it better. Or one of the better ways to take it is through IV if you have that opportunity. But a little quote here on the underneath the picture here. So combinations of these supplements can reduce significantly the fatigue and other symptoms associated with chronic disease and can naturally restore mitochondrial function, even in long-term patients with intractable fatigue. So, sometimes again, we are dealing with our own health or our patients' or clients' health, and it's overwhelming because they have so many symptoms, and it's like, where do we start? Well, let's start with the very basic, cellular function. If their cells are struggling, then the rest of their organs and bodies is potentially going to be struggling. So this is a really key piece to helping people heal and stay healthy. Mitochondria is also a big piece of anti-aging medicine, which has become really popular now. Obviously aging is inevitable, but how do we age in a very graceful way? How do we support health as much as we can as we age? And a lot of it is focused on mitochondrial health. Okay, so this is kind of interesting too. This is BDNF. These are brain-derived neurotropic factors. They're proteins that protect our neurons, and they play a role in creating new neurons. The BDNF acts like a growth hormone for neurons. It's vital for thinking, learning, higher level of brain functioning. And it's interesting that the gene that turns on BDNF production ultimately also helps to support mitochondrial health. So there are, many factors that can help with increasing BDNF and also supporting mitochondria. So here are just some of the things. So calorie restriction, which may not be the right thing for everyone, but doing things like fasting or intermittent fasting can be helpful. Curcumin, which comes from turmeric, a really good anti-inflammatory. DHA, which we know is an omega-3 fatty acid, especially helpful for the nervous system. Intermittent fasting, which we mentioned before, exercise, intellectual stimulation, so doing those puzzles, Sudoku, and so forth, meditation, and then ketosis, right? So this is brought on by eating a diet that's lower in carbohydrates and higher in healthy fats that can really appears to be provide efficient fuel for mitochondria and activate this BDNF. So speaking of that, here's a mitochondrial food plan. If you really want to focus on supporting the mitochondria, I like this picture too, because it just talks about the major qualities, right? So it's anti-inflammatory nutrients. We're going to have high quality dietary fats, focus on a low glycemic impact. So things that are not going to, burst and spike your blood sugar, which means reduced carbs with kind of a ketogenic option, higher fats versus the carbs. Intermittent fasting and calorie restriction can be really helpful for this. Low grain and especially gluten-free. Gluten can often increase inflammation in general for people. So just kind of trying to back down on anything that's inflammatory. Therapeutic foods, I will go over a list of some of the more therapeutic foods that are associated with mitochondria and BDNF production, and protective antioxidants. So that's kind of the main key themes of this food plan. I'm not going to show you an entire food plan, but here are some of those therapeutic foods that have known to support mitochondria in particular. And I like it too, because it kind of marks off with each food. So we've got almonds, which category that we just looked at, it really helps with. So for example, almonds, they are therapeutic energy food. They have antioxidants, anti-inflammatory properties, healthy fats. They can be part of a ketogenic and low glycemic diet, and they're gluten-free. So here's just a list of some of the main ones that even if you just focused on eating more of these foods, that could be really helpful for supporting mitochondria and overall immune health, as well as brain health. And I like this approach because I think a lot of times we see diets and it's like, all right, what do I have to take out? What can't I have? But this list here is showing here are things that you can have, in fact, that you should maybe increase to help support this area of the body. All right. Let's talk a little bit now about the power of botanicals, one of my favorites. So I love plants so much because they create this synergistic effect, right? Plants offer multiple different activities or mechanisms of action that when you layer them together, create a powerful synergistic effect. So they can be antimicrobial, they can have activity against biofilm, protective antioxidant actions, immune modulating, so balancing that immune response. And what's beautiful is that the outcome is not additive, but exponential. They offer a graceful and mighty solution that cannot be duplicated. The power to achieve and maintain balance, which is so important and so key in helping us to thrive. So here are some botanicals to support healthy virome. So again, although there's, what's interesting too is that there's not a whole lot of antiviral medications on the market. There's a handful, but botanicals offer such an amazing way to support a healthy virome. And at the same time can support immune function. So there was a study looking at phytocompounds derived from medical plants, including things like artemisinins, glycyrrhizins, and phenolinic compounds that were shown to impede absorption of COVID to the host cells and prevent multiplication of the virus post its entry into the host cell. So it slowed the absorption into the cell and also prevented it from multiplying, which is amazing. In addition to the antiviral activities, the herbs studied have also been demonstrated to exert an immune modulatory effect, so kind of regulate immune function, by controlling excessive releases of cytokines, right, which ultimately create inflammation in the body. And this is really important when it comes to COVID, because we know when COVID becomes a real issue and life-threatening, it's because the inflammation pathways are array, and we don't have a way, the body is losing sight of how to balance that immune response. So this is really key. So here are some of the herbs that were seen supportive against COVID in this study. So we got andrographis, artemisias, cannabis, curcuma, echinacea, olea, which is olive leaf, piper nigrum, black pepper, and punica. So there's many other ones that are antiviral with this particular.
Punica.
What's that?
Is there a common
I don't know that one. I don't know that one as well. I'd have to look it up. It's a great question.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can find it, but that one I'm not as familiar with.
Look it up.
Yeah, look it up. Let me know. It may be a Chinese herb. I'm not sure.
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. But and this is just a handful of herbs that they looked at, right? But there's many others. So it's cool to see studies like this where we're starting to.
Oh, you know what it is? Pomegranate.
Oh, it is pomegranate. See?
How about that? That's great. Yeah.
Awesome. Oh yeah, granatum. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
Seeds.
Yeah. So, and some of these things are, things we have in our kitchen. pepper, and olive and pomegranates maybe. So really cool to see studies like this. All right, and then some of my favorite botanicals to support healthy virome. So olive leaf, it can increase the immune response against viruses, as well as actually yeast as well. Pretty well at doing that by stimulating phagocytosis and interfering with virus attachment to the target cells. Elderberry, this is probably one that you've seen, especially for kiddos. It's a really great one. It's high in antioxidants. It increases cytokine production at the first stages of viral attachment. And at an early viral replication, it helps to kill the virus and stop replication. Monolaurin, this is a great one, especially for Epstein-Barr virus. This comes from coconut, and it helps to inhibit viral proliferation. So I've taken this many times when I've had EBV and had it reactivated. It really helped my symptoms quite a bit. This is a great one. Melissa officinalis, or lemon balm. This inhibits viral binding to the host cell. It inhibits replication and inhibits protease and proteins. Think like the spike protein, right? And with COVID. St. John's wort. This is, I think, a common one that people have heard about. Or hypericum is the actual constituent. Hypericin is antiviral, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory. The only thing to consider with this one, and sorry, I missed some of the other considerations, but St. John's wort, it can interact with various drug metabolizing enzymes. So it can induce, So you want to be cautious if you're taking this one with certain medications and ask your doctor before taking that. The thing to think about going backwards here, Melissa, it can affect thyroid levels. It can reduce them. So you want to avoid it in hypothyroid cases. And then the biggest thing with olive leaf that I've found is that it can cause nausea on an empty stomach. So I have people take it with food. And then it also has blood thinning ability. So if someone's on a blood thinner, then you want to be cautious about that. And then finally, licorice root. This is an adaptogenic herb. It's known as the great synergizer. So it helps kind of, if you're using it in a formula, it helps all the herbs kind of come together and work better together. But it also has antiviral properties, and it can reduce the breakdown of cortisol if someone has really low cortisol. So it's great. Cautious if they have high cortisol, and also it can increase blood pressure. So there is a version called DGL that doesn't affect blood pressure that way. All right, and then using herbs to control inflammation responses is also extremely helpful to regulate immune system. So we've got curcumin, which comes from turmeric, we've talked about. It's an anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, anti-tumor properties, also antioxidants. Quercetin, this comes from the skin of apples and onions. It's a natural antihistamine and antioxidant. And also can help heal the tight junctions of the gut. So it's good for supporting the barrier lining of the gut. Boswellia, or frankincense, one of my favorite anti-inflammatories, especially has affinity for the nervous system. And then things like EPA and DHA, which are important omega-3s that can support cell membrane integrity and nervous system function. All right, so the next few slides are on our products. And I know I went over these last time, so I'll go through them quickly. I think it's more kind of interesting to kind of talk about the herbs that are in these products, but just a reminder, we talked about supporting the gut is just so important when it comes to immune function and viruses and so forth. So this is a blend of 18 different herbs and essential oils. And what's nice about it is that it has the ability to have multiple different mechanisms of action, right? So it's going after multiple different types of pathogenic or harmful organisms. Simultaneously, it can disrupt and dismantle biofilm, which is a sticky substance where bacteria and viruses can hide behind. There's clinical research that shows it's immune modulatory, so it helps to kind of balance and regulate immune response. It can address inflammation, and this liquid version is the best delivery for the gut because it does come in multiple different forms. What's nice about it is kids can take it. You can titrate up and down because it is a potent formula. So it's helpful to kind of go low and slow. And this is something that you could do as a, once a quarter cleanse, a spring kind of, I just want to do like a gut reset. Or if you have some sort of dysbiosis or, chronic illness, something that you could take, for 2 or 3 months at a time to really clear things and bring balance back to the system. So to go along with it, there's a spore-based probiotic. This has 4 billion CFUs of a few different bacillus species that are listed here. These are especially helpful for helping to what's the word I'm looking for? To well, really just help recondition. There we go, recondition the gut so that it can start to repopulate the beneficial flora that it needs. And what's nice about the spores is that they're very resilient, so they can get through the stomach acid without being affected, and they're getting to the intestines where they need to be. Besides the spores, there's also 100 milligrams of quercetin that we know is a great antioxidant, antihistamine, anti-inflammatory, and healing the tight junctions, as well as some organic marshmallow root and aloe vera root, or aloe vera, which is extremely supportive and soothing to the gut lining. It's just 1 cap a day, really easy to take. GI Intercom is a gut healing powder. What I love about this powder is that it's a glycine base, not glutamine. So a lot of the gut healing powders you'll see on the market have glutamine, which does heal tight junctions, but has the potential to convert to glutamate, which is excitatory to the nervous system. And if we have someone that's stressed and anxious, we don't necessarily want to push that. So glycine also can help heal tight junctions, but it's calming to the nervous system. It can convert to GABA. It's also the rate-limiting amino acid to produce glutathione, which we talked about earlier, that supports mitochondria. So glycine can help support that parasympathetic rest and digest state, support vagus nerve tone for optimal healing. And then it also does have some zinc carnosine, quercetin, and DGL to help heal the gut lining. And then botanicals of chamomile, lemon balm, aloe, and ginger. So again, we've talked about lemon balm as being an antiviral. We talked about DGL, licorice is supporting the immune system and inflammation. So lots of the herbs we talked about in these products. And then Olivarix, this is our potent olive leaf extract. It has 375 milligrams of olive leaf per capsule. It is also a broad spectrum antimicrobial, especially good at balancing viruses. It has a handful of other herbs in it that are there for synergistic effect, but mainly there as the olive leaf. So this can be used alongside the biocidin that I showed you earlier, especially if there's kind of a stubborn infection or you really need that support for viruses. I always suggest people take it with food because it can cause a little bit of nausea on an empty stomach. And it could be taken alone too. You don't have to take it with biocidin. You could just use this if someone has a cold flu they're dealing with. This would be a great one to throw in. And then the Biotonic, I love this one. It's a Chinese herbal blend. And the main thing that it does is that it's an adaptogenic blend. It helps to support stress, how our body deals with stress. It helps to support bringing balance to energy, support our immune system to function appropriately. It also has some digestive bitters, which is going to help stimulate digestive enzyme production so that we can digest and break down our food better, as well as release bile, which is going to help us bind toxins and excrete them from the body. We can lower that toxic load, but really help to support our immune system to function better. So one of the herbs that has Artemisia, which we saw in some of those studies that has antiviral effects, as well as some antiparasitic and anti-yeast effects as well. This one you can take before meals to help with stimulating digestive enzymes. And then finally, the throat spray. This is a great local delivery of biocidin to the throat if you're having any kind of sore throat, upper respiratory kind of issue, overuse of voice. I use this a lot when I'm doing training since I'm talking the whole time. But this is a great product. We even have some placebo-controlled double-blind studies on collegiate athletes using this and showing an increase in something called their saliva secretory IgA, which is an indicator of immune function. So that was a really, really amazing thing to see. But this is a great one to just take daily during cold and flu season, or you're getting on a plane, you're going grocery shopping, you're going to the gym. Nice thing to just have to boost your immune system. Then, of course, if we are going to go after biofilm and go after infections, there is the potential that toxins can be involved. You can have something called die-off, where symptoms temporarily get worse before they get better. So using a binder can help mitigate that toxic burden on the body. So this is a blend of activated charcoal, zeolite clay, humic mineral, aloe, pectin, and silica. And this goes in and mops up those toxins so that people don't have that as severe of die-off reactions. And, we talked about being exposed to toxins already in our environment that can trigger things like infections and viruses. So this is really key. I normally start people on this one because we already have exposure to toxins. And so it's nice to kind of lower that before we potentially create some die-off with the biocidin. So this one you just want to take away from food, supplements, and other medications by at least an hour. Um, Typically, I have people take it between lunch and dinner with a full glass of water. And it works great for, die off and even other things like you drank too much or you ate something that didn't feel right, you had some food poisoning, things like that. You can take it to mop up those toxins. Okay, so those are some of the products I wanted to go through, but one of the best ways that you can support your overall immune system in your body is just doing kind of a regular reset. So whether it's fall or spring, these products come in a bundle where you can do a 2 month or a 1 month or a 2 month kind of protocol where you use these in conjunction with each other to help support the gut and the toxic load and increase the beneficial flora in the gut and so forth. What's nice about this particular program is that it also comes with a free toothpaste, and the toothpaste has biocidin in it. So we didn't have time to talk about it in this talk, but next month we are going to talk about the oral microbiome and its connection to systemic health, which is really, really interesting. So we know that there's a lot going on related to the mouth and what's going on in the body, and so this has biocidin in it to help address biofilm and plaque in the mouth. So kind of a great way to just keep your system as healthy as you can, especially when you're getting ready to enter things like winter and cold and flu season. All right, so overall here are our takeaways. So chronic viruses, they establish lifelong latency where they can remain dormant or can opportunistically reactivate when the host system is under stress. The virome refers to a collection of viruses and their genetic makeup that reside within us. Chronic viruses are part of this virome and they may be symbiotic or consequential. Chronic viruses and other immune systems are in a dance involving the delicate balance between immune stimulation and depression that ultimately influences inflammation levels and possible tissue damage. Focusing on gut health, reducing stress, supporting mitochondria function can help support host resistance to chronic viral infections. Botanicals offer a unique approach with multiple actions involving antiviral properties, biofilm busting, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant promoting, and immune modulating. And finally, regular cleanses focused on gut and immune function can strengthen our systems against the harmful effects of chronic viruses. All right, so I know that was a lot, but thank you so much for joining us. We do have many more resources and support on our Biosign Academy. So if you don't already have a pro account, this is a great way to do it. We can put this link here in the chat in just a second. You may be able to click on it, but if you go to Biocidin, there's a spot where you can register for a pro account and learn a lot more about our protocols and resources. Lots and lots of webinars as well there too. So it's a great spot. And thank you. Just want to thank you so much for listening and attending. Here is a discount code for you all to get 15% off the products. That will go until March 8th.